Thomas and Trevor, the 6th episode of the second series, wasn't based on any of the Railway series stories. It was instead based on an annual story of the same name written by Christopher Awdry. Trevor is sad when he does not have enough work to do, which he tells Edward during one of the Blue Engine's daily visits to the vicar's orchard. Edward has some good news for Trevor. The Fat Controller has asked that he be sent to the side of the new harbour to help out with the work. Trevor instantly perks up, excited about getting to work and meeting children, of course. Edward brings him to the yard to meet Thomas. Upon meeting Trevor, Thomas, who is carrying metal pilings needed for the construction work, is initially sceptical of the newcomer. After Trevor's flatbed is coupled to Thomas's train, the two set off to the harbour. On the way, Trevor explains what type of work he can do and does not need rails to be used for. This helps Thomas understand Trevor better. Upon arrival at the harbour, they come across havoc. Trucks are derailed and blocking the line, and stone slabs are littered throughout the area. Thomas's driver tells the two that the equipment Thomas is carrying is essential, so Trevor mustn't go to work taking it around the mess. Trevor, who enjoys this kind of work, is happy to do his job as soon as possible. While Thomas moves the trucks, Trevor carries the construction equipment to where it is needed. Thomas soon brings Annie and Cloudbot to the harbour to meet him, and is left very impressed with Trevor after seeing him work so hard. This makes him finally understand how useful the traction engine can truly be. Both Annie and Cloudbot are carrying children, whom Trevor is more than happy to give rides around the beach. This is easily his favourite part of the day, and Annie and Cloudbot remark to each other on how kind and gentle Trevor is and how he reminds them of Thomas. Thomas and Trevor are both very sorry when the day is over and Trevor has to return to the orchard. Taking him to the junction, Thomas notices that he has a small tear coming from his eye. He pretends not to notice and cheers Trevor up by telling him that there is now plenty of work for him at the orchard, and that he could be needed at the harbour again soon. And that makes Trevor feel better. That evening, Trevor thinks about the day's events and falls happily asleep. Compared to the previous episode, Old Iron, this was an episode where nothing exciting or exhilarating happens. It's just a nice, calm episode that just shows the working life of Trevor the Traction Engine and Thomas. And it bears quite a few similarities as Thomas, Terence and the Snow, where Thomas is sceptical about Terence the Tractor, but then soon learns how useful he really is. And it makes sense for Thomas to be this way around Trevor at first, because he'd obviously never seen a traction engine before. As I mentioned earlier, this episode was based on an annual story rather than a Railway series story, but because it was still written by Christopher Awdry, that made it okay to use. And this is the first time we get to see a different type of harbour on the island rather than the one that was introduced in Series 1's episode The Flying Kipper. And it once again shows the industrial aspect that Series 2 had introduced. Though there is one quote from the episode that might raise a couple of eyebrows.
A small tear came into Trevor's eye. Thomas pretended not to see. He whistled gaily to make Trevor happy.
Now, people from today's generation might not be aware of this, but the term gay or gaily was usually used as a way to say if someone was happy. And it was commonly used back then before it started to just mean people who like the same sex. So this might go over people's heads and some people might roll their eyes about it, but it was from an old generation. So despite not being as action-packed as the previous episode, Thomas and Trevor didn't really need to be. I see it as a nice quick breather for people that just watched the previous episode. Something nice, simple and wholesome to look forward to before getting to more of the more exciting episodes later on in the series. And that ending monologue that Ringo Starr gives out is just so wholesome to me.
That evening, Trevor stood remembering his new friend Thomas, the harbour, and most of all, the children. Then he went happily to sleep in the shed at the bottom of the orchard.
It's one of his best performances in the show from my point of view. So for me, this episode's definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen it for a while. It's a nice quick breather from the previous Runaway episode before we get to more exciting episodes later on in this series, and it's a great way to show more of Trevor the Traction Engine, a fan favourite among fans.